there's something about doing the podcast every week which I find of benefit for myself. It's like, obviously I miss being on stage. I was on stage on Tuesday night for about 4 or 5 minutes doing a little letter of remembrance about Mary McPartland, singer, arts manager over in Galway, and she died 2 years ago. The first podcast I ever made was about Mary McPartland, because she had just died that week. She died about the 6th of April, I think it was, in 2020. And the lockdown was starting and everybody was very serious about the isolation. And so for about 10 days before she died, it was very, very difficult for her family. They couldn't get in to see her. Think about the isolation and the loneliness of that. My goodness. It was just terrible. And so they had a remembrance event for her in the town hall in Galway last Tuesday night, and I was there, and it was very, very moving. Very moving. And I'm telling you this because I enjoyed the podcast because it fulfills a performance thing within me, that sense of trying to share intimately my story. And I used to do it like when I'd be reading from my books and I'd be on stage, and that was like for a decade, 10 years I've been doing that, and I love it. But in the lockdown I stopped, and this became a substitute. And now I love this as well. I love sharing this with you because you're here. I wrote a letter to Mary, and I'll read it to you because that's what I read on stage. I wrote it to her. I wrote it to her after she died, and funny enough, this is the core of the book that I'm now writing. I'm in the middle of writing a book that I hope I'll finish by the summer, and I hope that it'll be on the bookshelves in October or November of this year. And I'm writing it. It's like a collection of love letters. Well, they're just letters, but in a way they're love letters. They're letters about love. But they're letters that I would have written in the past year but never sent. I'm not a good man to write letters. I find it very difficult all my life to put stamps on envelopes, to stick letters in post boxes. I just don't do it. And even sometimes when I get the most beautiful letters from people who've read my books or heard me speak, to my shame, there are so many letters that I put away in a file, and because of illness and this, that and the other, I've still not got round to answering them. And sometimes then I'm looking at a letter and I think I better answer this, and it was written maybe 2 years ago, and that gives me a sense of shame. But the biggest sense of shame I have would be for the letters that I didn't write to people that mattered to me, and, that there was love between us at some stage in our lives. And then maybe we drifted apart. And then maybe there's something on your mind that you felt, I'd love to say that to that person, and you never say it. But you're always putting it on the long finger. You're always saying, I must do that sometime. I must go and call on that person when I'm over in Galway or in Westmeath or wherever. And then you don't do it. And then one day the phone rings and somebody is on the other end and they say, Mary's dead. Pat is dead. John is dead. There are 3 names of 3 people that I genuinely felt a sadness in myself that I had failed. I had failed to reach out to them before they died. To tell them how much I loved them. To tell them how wonderful life was when we were young and we were doing various things and so on and so forth. Just to knock the door and say hello. I remember the good times we had, and they warm my heart and they give me joy looking back. I think that's something I have failed to do because I'm cautious emotionally. I know it's a contradiction. You get this in every writer. that are, on one level, if it's writing, if it's actually in a book or if it's on a stage, I will reveal everything. I will reveal the most intimate details of my life. And yet in ordinary life, I played the cards very close to my chest, and I cherish my privacy, and I'm very slow to open out. And those two things are related, I think. I think it's the dynamic that makes writers be writers. That because they're actually so private in their ordinary life, they have a compulsion to find some space where they can kind of use as a safety valve to get it all out. And for me, that's being on stage. But when I went over to Galway, I read a letter that I had composed to Mary, and a letter that I never sent. Because when I started recovering, I was in hospital this time last year. I got out of hospital after major surgery on Good Friday of 2021, and I have spent 12 months, I suppose, healing. And I've spent a lot of that time here in Donegal, by the ocean, just walking on the beach and meditating and reflecting and kind of feeling grateful for being alive. And feeling grateful that I have the use of my legs. And those were things I was worried about. So during that time, I found myself writing letters to people in a certain way, reaching out to them. But I never posted any of them. And so what I'm trying to do is put them in a book. So it would be a collection of letters to about maybe half a dozen, maybe 10 people who I've written to in the past 12 months during this time of recovery, and in a sense reaching out with that realization that if you don't speak to people now, a moment in time may come where you can't speak to them. You know, there's nothing can be said, really, at the funeral. All you can do is regret that you didn't tell the person more how much you loved them. And I'll read you the letter that I wrote to Mary. Dear Mary, now Mary she was 65 when she died 2 years ago. She lived a full life, 4 children, and I knew her when she was 21, when she was working in Sligo. We were both young, and she was like a sister to me. And I was in a flat where one woman in the flat below me downstairs, she used to play the guitar in the choir. And Mary, also a great singer and guitarist, she used to play her, not in the choir. She used to go to Connolly youth meetings because she was more a socialist. She didn't have much time for the church in those days. And so the 2 women would be downstairs rehearsing, and I'd hear them, and I'd go down, and we got to know each other. And I found her a wonderful person. She was the best woman or bridesmaid or woman of honour, whatever you call them nowadays, at my wedding. When I was ordained a priest, she sang at my first mass. She ran the company Shigahana Productions, who brought a play of mine with Tom Hickey to the Edinburgh Festival and toured Ireland. God, there were so many ways that my life with Mary McPartlin connected, and so many ways that she was so helpful to me. And we drifted apart. It's that terrible phrase. We drifted apart in the last few years of her life. And there were so many times where I meant to call. I meant to check in with her. I meant to, get time so I could go and have a lunch with her or something. And it never happened. You put it on the long finger. But I never expected she was going to die. And the same thing happened to me with with John O'Donoghue, that wonderful and great human being, author of Anam Cara and all those other really great books and reflections, a profound poet and philosopher. We were close as students in Maynooth for 4 years, very close. We travelled across Europe together in a truck with a truck driver who happened to be a cousin of mine, all through France and up over the Alps. We had such wonderful times. And we drifted apart. And then when his book started to become very famous, I felt, gosh, I really must reach out to him and connect again, and say how much I share his joy and delight in his success and all the rest of it, and have an old coffee. And I never did, but I never expected he would pass away so suddenly. And again, it was ironic. I remember afterwards speaking to somebody who's a great friend of his in the latter years, and she said to me, John used to talk about you. And that broke my heart, because it meant like he was in one place talking about me, remembering the good old days. I was in somewhere else talking to somebody else about the good old days, and we never reached out to each other to say, you and me must sit down and have a pint together sometime, John. We never did that. And then, as I say, suddenly he dies. And the third one I'll give you an example of was a beautiful and wonderful man, Bernard Loughlin. And again, I often speak of him and write about him. He was the director of the Anna McCarrick, the Tyrone Guthrie Centre in Anna McCarrick. And I was in my 20s, and I had a book finished, and it was with Blackstaff Press. And I went to Anna McCarrick to do the final draft. Well, Bernard opened the door of Anna McCarrick to me, because I came with no confidence. I went to school in Cavan, secondary school, St. Pat's College, Cavan. I didn't emerge with much confidence that I would belong to the group of successful people in the world called artists and writers. I wanted all my life to be a writer, to be a storyteller. I revered all the writers around me, but I never felt kind of worthy to be among them. And the threshold for me was Anna McCarrick. It was my education, my coming of age as a writer, because you walked in there and Bernard, the director, made you welcome. He dealt with you with the same dignity as if he was dealing with some very famous writer. He took you seriously as an artist. He took everybody equal as artists. And he was so encouraging and so warm, and he ran such a wonderful place that it amazed me. And the people I met in Anna McCarrick in 1984 and 85, painters and writers and musicians, I maintained friendships with them for my entire life. It was a transformative experience for giving confidence to a young person in his 20s as a writer, and I so appreciated Bernard for that. Now, there were other parts of the story that are heartbreaking. He wrote a book called In the High Pyrenees, in which he outlines a terrible event of child abuse that happened to his son, and it's a devastating book. I was close to him at that moment of his pain, but there was another time when he was close to me in a time of fear, and that was when I lived in Fermanagh, and I was very nervous of all the troubles, and I sometimes used to go over across the border and use Anna McCarrick as a refuge, and I'd just sit in his kitchen with himself and his lady wife. And they would build up my confidence and calm me down about any anxieties I might have about the troubles. So we had been really through good times and bad times, ups and downs, as is the case with everyone's life. And then he retired from the Tyrone Guthrie Centre and went off to live in the house that he had and his family had in the Pyrenees. And every so often I'd accidentally bump into maybe one of his children or some close friend, and they'd say, "You must come out to his house. He's up in the Pyrenees. He'd love to see you." And I'd always say, "Yes, I must do that. I haven't done it yet, but I must. I just have to do that." And I never did it. I put it off. And then one Friday evening, I got a phone call from his daughter to say that there had been an accident in the garden and he was dead. And I found myself, and 24 hours later, on a plane to Barcelona. I found myself on Sunday in a car, a rented car, driving up the zigzag roads of the Pyrenees to a house of a dear friend. And I felt, again, a sense of remorse, a sense of neglect, that I hadn't gone there when he was alive. So one of the things that has come to me in this year of healing, since Good Friday of 2021, when I got out of hospital, and in all the hours and hours and hours I've spent through the summer and the autumn and the winter here in Donegal, looking out the window, and being alone, by the way. I come here to be, essentially to have time on my own and to reflect and to, I feel, just heal myself by talking to the sea and listening to the sea, the ocean. And part of that healing is, as I say, been to notice how many people I neglected to reach out to, and then discovered as you get older, people pass away. And it's too late to tell them then how much you love them. And I thought, I'll write a couple of letters, of things that are unsaid. Letters that I wouldn't post. And then I'll publish them. And I'm in the middle of that. So I'll read you the one, a brief little one that I wrote to Mary McPartlin. Dear Mary, do you remember singing A Rainy Night in Soho at a concert in Westmeath 8 years ago? It was in a church. The angels in the stained glass windows looked sad. And I was thinking, like, maybe they'd come down from their cold eternity of stained glass and join in the crack. And then your eyes met mine. I've been loving you a long time, you sang, down all the years, down all the days. Mary, I remember when you used to sing on the sofa in 17 the Mall in Sligo, you and another young woman from Drumkeerin. And your voice came to me up through the floorboards, and I went down and opened the door to see your face. I've been listening to your voice a long time, Mary, since that first night. The first time ever I saw your face. You were 21 years old. I saw you in the big tent at the Ballysadare Folk Festival, and Paul Brady came over to you afterwards to say hello. That was in August 1977. You travelled far since then, Mary. I used to go to prayer meetings when I was in Sligo, and you'd go to Connolly youth meetings. And afterwards we'd link up in the Trades Club. You, singing love songs all night. You could raise your voice for Joe Hill and Mandela and refugee camps in Lebanon. Raising your voice to the world, you sang for everyone. And the fiddle player folded his arms, settled his instrument on his knees, and bowed his head to listen to you. Mary, those were nights when, as Rumi says, we found the wine that was ready before the grapes were grown. Those were nights when I saw in your face the face you had before you were born. It's been a long and winding road, Mary, and everywhere people gathered around you, because your heart was a field beyond what is right or wrong. Your heart was a field where grew the thorn and the rose, the thistle and the wild mountain thyme. Wherever you are tonight, Mary, I imagine your heart as a field of sunflowers. Rumi says that whoever brought us here will take us home. But we didn't think you'd go so soon. It's as if you dissolved into the night behind the stained glass window. Whoever brought us here will take us home, and no more to be said. Dear Mary, Slán Abhaile. And that was for Mary McPartlin, and all the great nights we had, and all the joy we had, and all the ways that, you know, as young people you promise each other the world. It's the lovely thing about you. Lovely thing about being young is that you're at that time when you're looking ahead and looking forward, and you can dream anything. And one of the best lines always to believe in is the line, almost everything is possible. With faith, almost everything is possible. When you come to this end of life, when you're in your 60s, you're looking back more. And I find that remorse can be helpful. If remorse is just something like baggage and like it holds you down, and if you don't look at it, then that's not helpful. You're just dragging around an extra weight with you. But I feel that in the past year, I allowed myself to look at the remorse side of life. You know, to look at the regrets. To look at the way that I failed other people. Not in a particular nasty way or negative way, but just in the way that I am as a human being. My own just general imperfection is the flaw that on so many occasions let me down. And so that moves me from remorse into, I suppose, a meditation on my own sense of being flawed. And there's a sense of wanting to make reparation. Many of the people that I'm talking about that maybe I neglected, I didn't take up the phone and say, you know, let's have an evening or a lunch and let's share and let me tell you, let me just write you a letter even. I mean, I wouldn't have had to go out and have a whole bash of an evening with everybody I'm talking about. I could have at least written them a letter. I could have at least written a Christmas card. You know, what would 2 pages at Christmas take out of my life as an effort to write to some dear friend who once was a really important friend? What it would have taken? Nothing. To sit down and put 2 pages together saying how much I appreciated them, how much I loved them, how much I was grateful for the good time that we had and all the rest of it. So many people I didn't do it with. And that is a kind of a remorse to acknowledge it. And I have been doing that. But it's only good, remorse is only good if it's going to get me somewhere, right? So where it gets me is, number one, to do better. And that is to be more attentive to try and reach out, at least now, to whoever still is alive. Oh God, it's precious. The ones around you, your parents, your friends, but everybody, because you'll be surprised by death. We all are. We're all amazed by who is taken and who is left. Now is the moment, now is the time to reach out to people. So that's a real kind of way of dealing with remorse that's positive. And the other way is an internal way for me. It's a sense of acknowledging that the inadequacy in me is simply my flaw. It's not something to feel obsessively bad about. It's just the way I am. So I don't want to be writing gushy letters to people. I talk gushy. I love talking intimately. I love this on stage or in a podcast. I'm doing these podcasts because I miss being on stage. I used to love being on stage with an audience of 300 people, and I would tell them my most intimate little stories about my emotions. And I love doing that in the podcast. And maybe that's part of the kind of paradox of a writer, that maybe writers share so much intimately in public and in their stories simply because they're so private in ordinary life. In ordinary life, I don't think I'm an extrovert. I don't know what that means, but I'm a quiet person. But put me on a stage or behind a microphone and I will tell you everything. It's a compulsion, storytelling. It's like a weakness. And it certainly feels like a weakness sometimes if you're at a dinner table and you get going and you can't stop yourself until you see the eyes of the people at the table looking up to heaven thinking, will he ever fucking shut up? Because I can go on. In the old days, I used to rant. I used to, my beloved would say it was like I was like a dog with a bone. Once I would get into a subject, I wouldn't stop talking about the one single thing all night. I try and over the years to have improved a little bit so that I'm not a party bore. And I try to, one of the tricks about making sure you're not a party bore is, number one, never talk about politics, never talk about religion. Not so much religion, but never talk about politics, never talk about something that will divide the table. And the minute you talk politics, you will divide the table. There will be some with you, some against you. And that division will sow a poison around the table. And somebody has gone to the effort of getting beautiful bottles of wine, good Bordeaux wine, let's say, and they've roasted a beautiful chicken or chicken and ham or, some wonderful salads and gorgeous pastas and everything. And it's a big feast going on. And all you have to do is say, what do you think of Brexit? And you've divided the table, but you've also ruined the night to some extent because you've set up this sort of internal fracture of intellectual disagreement. And that's not the way to unify people, and it's not the way to be loved at the table. There's one other way that will not help you at the dinner table, and that's if you're talking about yourself or your family, don't tell people anything good. They don't want to know how wonderful your holiday was in the south of France. They don't want to know that your daughter got so many 1,000 points in her leaving cert or a first class honours degree. They love to know if you're depressed, I find. That's really interesting, So I'm just joking to some extent, but there's a truth in it, Don't bore people with how wonderful you are, and don't divide people with politics. Now, what have you left? Well, storytelling. And you're a storyteller. I keep saying this, that I meet better storytellers in the gala shops of the world than I am myself. Far better, far richer storytellers. They're all over the place. It's you out there, the way you're talking to your mother or your aunt or your cousin or the person down in the shop, the way we talk to each other when we're gossiping, when we're chatting along the road. We are all wonderful storytellers. Largely, it's simply when somebody says, how are you doing? The answer is, I'm great. Do you know who I met yesterday? And then you tell the story of meeting that person. So we're always telling stories. How you tried to get the lawnmower fixed. That's a story. We're not aware of it like, oh, I'm a big storyteller. No, but we are always beautifully telling stories. And stories, for some extraordinary reason, brings people together. Everybody belongs in a story. My story this week is one of remorse. Remorse that says, well, I'll try and do better in future. I'll try and reach out to more people that are my friends. I will write a letter a bit more and actually post it, saying I'm thinking of you. That sort of stuff. But also it helps me accept the sense of who I am as being flawed. I'll tell you the difference. You say to a young man, you're very boring at the table. The young man gets annoyed. He says, no, I'm not. I was simply telling an important thing about the world. Say to an old man, you are very boring at the table. And if that older man has made the journey into wisdom and self-knowledge, when you say, you're very boring at the table, he will smile and say, I know, I'm fucking terrible. Because he knows himself. And that is, to me, a key discovery. In older times, in older age. A key discovery is this settling down with your own flaws. No matter what they are. You might be insensitive. You might be like really, really not tuned in with emotional intelligence to where people are at. And you might be always blundering and saying the wrong thing. That's okay. It's you. It's you. Everything is okay to be you. Your flaws. Why do I say that though? You see, there's an undercurrent here coming. A big undercurrent. And that is, my inadequacies are made up by they're completed, they're made perfect by the underlying template of completion or perfection that is in God. And there we are again. I can't get away from the word. It is that sense of depth. I've talked about this in a different context, where I was talking about the surface of reality, that you have the surface of reality and then there's a kind of a depth, the invisible. You can feel it when you're standing at a lake and you have this sense of relationship with the lake, like a rapport with the lake. It's like a person. The lake is like relating to you, as if it had a presence, and you can sense it. It's like a depth below the surface. And here it is in the same context, that on the surface, in me, it's incomplete. But the depth in me is the godness in me. That which completes me. That which makes me whole. And this is beautifully and powerfully encapsulated in the Christian myth, story, truth, revelation, call it what you want, the story of Jesus. And in all that he suffered, up against the winds of a savage humanity, and enduring it in perfect love and compassion, and then lifted up on the cross, and in this moment is revealed some depth that was hidden until that moment. Some brokenness in the human species, some flaw in the entire cosmos is made complete at a hidden level and at a level of depth by this event, this Christ event, this redemptive, transformative moment. And they're going to be talking about this moment for hundreds of years to come, as they have been for 2,000 years in the past, because language will never adequately express the Christ event, or the way that that event is inside all of us. We are made complete by Christ. Some cosmic archetype finds its completion in Christ. And that archetype arises in our unconscious, becomes large and grows through our growing, through our awakening, and ultimately becomes larger than us, and so enfolds us. And so the Christ that we once picked up in the word Jesus, the Christ that we found coming to us in the Eucharist, this small cultural window allows in a life and a presence that grows within us and grows bigger than our ego, creates in us this archetypal higher self that transforms us completely. It transforms not just us but the cosmos. And that's a queer amount of stuff to be thinking about when you're writing letters that you don't post. But you see what I'm saying? That being a Christian is a great consolation. The insight, the good news in the Christian message is about this idea that whatever flaw there is in this human moment, in this cosmic moment, and flaws are like, you only have to go out to the Ukraine, you only have to think about Auschwitz, you only have to say a word like Nazi or other really, really dark words that evoke the presence of darkness so intensely that you could imagine it actually has a personification itself as evil, as an evil presence. So yeah, we are flawed. If every so often human beings are sort of opening out that energy, something flawed. And I always feel like, even, do you know the way a row will break out sometimes when you least expect it? Everybody's under stress. It might be Easter coming up, and everybody's done a lot. There's a lot of goodwill and everybody's put a lot of effort into it. And then all of a sudden there's a kind of stress because people are not working together, or they're misunderstanding each other, or there's or some other little argument from last year comes back again to haunt you. And then there's an awful argument. Do you know the way for a beautiful day? It might be a christening, it might be First Holy Communion, it might be an Easter Sunday, it might be a wedding anniversary. Do you know the way when a beautiful moment is destroyed by anger? Like destroyed, like the day is, as you'd say, the day is ruined. Fucking ruined, you'd say. Excuse me, bad language, but you have to use the word to get the feeling of it. Do you know when somebody just, the whole thing is destroyed? It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable to see that destruction. And it's like, it's not a physical destruction. You're not looking at, a house that's burnt down. But you're looking at the house burnt down inside, on the inside. It's like the depth level. The surface is okay. Maybe he only raised his voice a little bit, but yet what he said is like, in the depth of our being, somebody burned a house down. Some terrible destruction is, and relationships get destroyed in those moments. So we are a really we do enough stuff in history to be very guilty. And if we wanted to be negative, and there's a lot of people who are, and develop ideologies of negativity, about like how awful we all are as human beings, it's very easy to go that road. It's very easy to look at all the devastation and say, there you are, that proves my point. We're a bad crowd. And so sometimes even this despair or despondency about the whole cosmos is a poison in itself that we feed to young people, and young people grow up thinking like there's no point in having babies, there's too many humans in the world. The world is being destroyed. Why? By human beings. We're like a cancer on the earth. We're terrible. That's a pretty negative way to be looking at your life. We're desperately in need of a sense of redemption, a sense that no matter how great the flaw, there is in the depth of us a completion that is our godliness. We are mirrors of God in the depths of our heart. And we will reach that completion in the journey of transformation, the journey towards redemption. Call it what you will. We will come home to a sense of completion. We will be forgiven of all sins, all weakness, all faults, no matter how great they are. And this impels us to forgive others of everything. Not to forgive conditionally, but to forgive unconditionally and forgive everything. And that is the kind of journey that I would be on this week. My joy is to share it with you. And I'm going to make a special podcast simply focusing on the 7-limbed prayer, which is a kind of an infrastructure of prayerfulness that you will find in many, many different Tibetan Buddhist practices. It's just a kind of an it's like an architecture. It's a kind of an architecture of prayer. It's called the 7-limbed prayer. I'm going to go through it by doing a prayer called Tsongkhapa Guru Yoga. And I'll just analyze or make a light reference to each of the 7 limbs of the prayer. And then I will take that and see how that works for a Christian. Because all the breadth of wisdom that is in the Buddhist tradition, which in itself is not a religion of revelation, it is a psychotherapy, it is a kind of a great reservoir of wisdom in relation to mind training. Well, of course, all of that is valuable and enriching as you focus within the Christian tradition on being a better Christian. So that's the next step. This is how I am on this particular Friday coming up to Holy Week. And the next step will be to look at that beautiful, beautiful Buddhist prayer. Thank you. You know what I'm going to say? I'm going to say thank you for being here. Are you here? Are you? Okay. I know you're here. It's a very beautiful thing to be here. And to be here now. And to be here now knowing that there are people who once were like this, breathing and waking and being, and yet now are no more, have passed away. And we may have missed moments that we could have shared with them. We may feel remorse because we missed them and missed the opportunities that are no longer there. But if we turn that remorse into a time of possibility, a time to acknowledge who we are in all our failings, and to experience a sense that the cosmic godness within us that comes to us in the small wafer of Christ and the tiny little insights that we get as we grow about the Jesus story, that they can grow in us to be an enormous archetype, an enormous, overwhelming presence of perfection and love and forgiveness that becomes even bigger than us and envelops us, enfolds us like the tenderness of a mother. And that's what we're here for. And that's how we're here. And that's what being here is about. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Bye-bye.